to the cloud. All right, now I'm recording. Quick review. We said we talked about the Mishnah last time. We're looking at what a page of Talmud looks like. And so if you look right above that little number 1 on the Hebrew side, right there where you see a larger size font that says Mem Taf Nun, that stands for Matne, which in Aramaic is the word for Mishnah. So that's symbolizing that that's where a Mishnah is starting. So anytime that in the Talmud you see those big upper kind of like bigger letters with Mem, that means, there's a Mishnah here. It's going to be in Hebrew. That's what that is. Now, we're going to go back to the Gemara to see here for Gemara. So you might have heard these words get thrown on Mishnah and Gemara. The Talmud is both the Mishnah and the Gemara together. So usually when people say that they're studying Talmud, what they mean more is Gemara. What they mean, because that's the later layer, that's the really big collection that you would have seen. That's what's often known as the Talmud. But the Talmud itself has most of the Mishnah in it. There's a few tractates of Mishnah that don't have a Gemara. So like Pirkei Avot, we've all heard of. There's no Talmud, there's no Gemara on Pirkei Avot. It just exists as the Mishnah. But most tractates of the Mishnah also have Gemara, also have Talmud that layers on top of them. So we're not going to read this entire thing. You can kind of read along as I talk about it. But the Gemara, which is in Aramaic, and is in Aramaic, here it says it means study. It also means completion, like from the word gamar, to complete, is an analysis of an expansion upon the material presented in the Mishnah. And as it says, taken together, the Mishnah and the Gemara are the Talmud. If the Mishnah records the Tanaic material, the Gemara is the Amoraic material. So it's from the generations known as the Amoraim, who were active, as it says, about from 200 to 500, even into 600, in Iraq and modern-day Israel-Palestine. There's 2 Gemaras. There's the Babylonian Gemara, which is the more often studied, the Babylonian Talmud, and the Yerushalmi or Palestinian Gemara, which is less often studied. We have it in a bit more of a fractured sense that we don't have it. We have complete copies of it, but the manuscripts that we had passed down of the Palestinian Talmud or the Talmud Yerushalmi were a bit harder to decipher, and so it's a little bit harder to read in terms of its Aramaic, in terms of that it doesn't always work in complete sentences. It's just a little bit tougher. So Babylonian Talmud is the more kind of complete work, and so that's what's most often studied. That's what it just talked about. Wonderful. And as it says, the Bavli was redacted about 500 or 600. It's a little bit later now believed. And it's attributed to Rav Ashi and Ravina, who are quoted extensively in the Talmud, those 2 rabbis. So just like Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi, is quoted extensively in the Mishnah, the people who are credited with the redaction of the Talmud are also quoted extensively in it.
Well, they got to make the decisions.
Exactly. As it notes, the primary language of the Gemara is Aramaic, but there's plenty of Hebrew material also. We have a lot to get through today. I was going to bring a funny video from Hayehudim Ba'im where they took an old Israeli game show and they had the players play it in Aramaic, but it's all just nonsense Aramaic. But they're just saying lots of like words like chad from Chad Gad Ya and other places. It's very funny because even though we wouldn't understand any of it, neither would Israelis because it's in Aramaic. So the whole point of it is that you don't understand it. But like if you know Hebrew, there are words in Aramaic that will stand out. It's kind of like if you know one Romance language, if you know Spanish and you hear French, you don't know the language, but there are words and roots that will be familiar and similar to Hebrew and Aramaic. They were both, contemporaneous languages in that part of the world and had a lot of the same Semitic language roots. So they have similar grammar, similar words, but they are different languages. That if you got plopped into Aramaic speaking land and you are a Hebrew speaker, it would not be easy. It is not simple. It is not easy. And important to note, the Gemara, if you look on the back side of the page, the Talmud, just like the Torah, is written without punctuation and without ends of sentences and without vowels or anything. So often when you're learning Gemara, if you're learning to read from a daf of Gemara, from a page, daf means page. If you're learning from a page of Gemara, a lot of the work is just figuring out Where does the period go? What's an where is the question mark? What exactly is happening? Because all of the Talmud is written in dialogue. So-and-so said to so-and-so, and then he said to him, wait, which he said to which who? How does it all? And so a lot of the time in the study of Talmud, if you're studying it in its original, is spent trying to figure out exactly what's going on. So in my rabbinical school classes, for example, when we first started studying Gemara, when we first started studying Talmud, we would have to chart out our, like, who was this saying this? What kind of a statement was it? What were they quoting from? And you really do that in order to be able to fully understand and appreciate what's going on in the Talmud. We're not going to do that sort of charting today, but that's kind of how Talmud study often looks. Okay, so that's the center of the page. That's the meaty part of the page. Also, just another important thing to note, the Gemara, so the Mishnah is usually these very concise statements. The Gemara is anything but concise. The Gemara will take a statement about Shabbat and will end up in a statement about kashrut because they were telling a story about how someone who kept Shabbat, but then there was a chicken involved, so then they get sidetracked about chickens and kashrut. Like, it goes all over the place. The point is not to stay on topic. Oftentimes they will lose their way and meander and tell the story of two rabbis who went on a journey in order to prove a point about something else. So it can get very far afield. And it is truly, we talked last week about halacha and agadah, about how we have this tension between law and story. And the Talmud very much has both. It has long sections that are very concerned with what is the specific ruling, what is the law for this thing. And then it has other long sections where they don't concern themselves with laws at all. And it's really just rabbinic story time. And so it definitely has both. But important to remember, a lot of the times those stories are used to establish case law. So the stories are important. Although in later years, next week, we're going to talk about codes, Jewish law books. And what the codes attempted to do was to take the Talmud and strip away the stories just to get to the law. And so that became a later project that we'll get to later. So we are going back.
When did that start?
As soon as the Talmud was done. Yes, Lee.
There's a whole bunch of stuff above the Mishnah. And what's that?
Yes. Okay, so we're about to get there.
Oh,
so
okay.
If you look here on the very top of the English page, it'll say there's the page, the tractate name, the chapter number, the chapter name. So that's the very top line. So the bigger print on the Hebrew, where it says at the very top, that's the chapter name, the chapter number, the tractate name, and the page number. But the text that's wrapped around the Mishnah, that's like over it, that's normal sized, that's what we're going to talk about now.
Oh, wait, and this stuff right here?
Oh, that's just other Gemara, because it can interrupt it.
Okay.
Yeah, it goes back and forth between Mishnah and Gemara, and like we said, that big mem that says now it's a Mishnah. And if you look back in the Hebrew, right above number 2, here, one second, I'll show you on the screen.
Yeah.
Right above number 2, see that Gimel mem right above the number 2 that's bigger? That says, oh, we're starting some Gemara now. And then next time you see the mem again, then we're back in the Mishnah, because they'll discuss one Mishnah for a page, and then they'll give the next Mishnah, and then they'll discuss that, and then they'll give the next Mishnah, and that's just kind of how they work their way through.
So that Mishnah started, or
right, the Gemara that's above that Mishnah started on the previous page discussing a previous Mishnah. Okay. You always start each chapter with a Mishnah, because that's how you start the discussion, because they're always commenting on the Mishnah. But then in the chapter, it goes back and forth between Mishnah and Gemara. Great question. Okay. So now we are going to look at what's all this stuff around the Mishnah and the Gemara, because the Mishnah and the Gemara are the core that was, solidified around, as it said, the year 500, 600. But there's all this other writing on the page. So the page that we're working off of is important to note. It's what's called a Vilna Shas. So it was a page that was designed by the Gaon of Vilna, but was actually first printed in Venice by the Bromberg Press. But this is what's known as a Vilna Shas, a Vilna page of Talmud. So, as you can see, the two larger sections of wraparound, you can look in the English. One of them is Rashi, and one is Tosfot. The Rashi is always the one, and they're both written in what's called Rashi script. Here in the English, you can see they're written in italics. If you look at the Hebrew, you'll notice that the wraparound is in a different script. It is not in a normal decipherable Hebrew script. This is a script that's called Rashi script.
That's terrible.
It's terrible. It is. It's a script that was not developed by Rashi himself. It's not Rashi's fault that there's Rashi script. But it was a way to differentiate between the core and the commentary. And Rashi script is also used in a Tanakh, in a Bible, if you read it, that has Rashi commentary. The Rashi commentary will be in this Rashi script. And in Talmud, the commentary around the sides, it's used to differentiate between the two texts, between the core text and the Rashi and the Tosfot. So yes, is there a question? No, okay. So Rashi, who we've talked about a lot, we've talked about some, we've talked about more in Jews and Brews. Sorry, there's crossover here from classes. So Rashi, an 11th century French scholar, and the Rashi script, because there's two things, there's Rashi and Tosfot. The Rashi is always going to be on the part of the page that is closer to the binding. So on one side of the page it'll be on the right, on the other side of the page it'll be on the left, but it's always the side closer to the binding is the Rashi script. So if you open a book, I have a Masechet of Talmud I can open and we can look at it later if we want to here in the class. But the Rashi will always be closer to the binding. And Rashi, generally, his commentary is focused on what's going on here. Rashi is the classic commentator of like, these words are confusing, how can we explain them? Like he tries to answer the questions that a quote-unquote normal person or a normal scholar would have when reading Gemara, when reading the Talmud. So Rashi is going to comment, and every time Rashi comments, there's like what's called a Devar HaMatchil, the starting word that'll be bolded. So like if Rashi's commenting where it says like, if Rashi were commenting on this where it says the Gemara is an analysis of an expansion upon the material, it would say like expansion in big bold letters, and then Rashi's explanation of what exactly expansion means. And so Rashi is commonly used by people to help elucidate the text and to help us understand the text better. The Tosafot, on the other side of the page, it's also written in Rashi script. The Tosafot are a collection of commentators, many of whom were descendants of or married to descendants of Rashi. They come about 50 to 150 years after Rashi.
Like Rashbam?
Rashbam, exactly, and some of his contemporaries. But there's also different collections of Tosafists. There's the French Tosafists and the German Tosafists and the Spanish Tosafists. Not important. Don't worry about that. What's important to know is that the Tosafot have a special project in the Talmud. The Tosafot look at the whole Talmud and they recognize, there are inconsistencies here. Sometimes one rabbi will say something in Tractate Shabbat, and then you'll get to Tractate Avodah Zarah, and the same rabbi will seem to make a comment that is the exact opposite. And that can't be the case, because according to traditional study of Jewish texts, you can't have these contradictions. So the Tosafists in their commentary, they are brilliant in being able to span the entire text, and they try to bring into harmony different commentaries by different rabbis in different places. So in general, if we are studying Talmud together, we will probably not be looking at a lot of Tosfot. Tosfot is specifically for people who are doing a more broad study of Talmud or a super deep study of like one very small section. So that's the Tosfotic commentary. And they really want to try to figure out why different parts of the Talmud happen in different places. So I'm just going to go back to the Hebrew really quickly on the screen so you can see where these two things are. The Rashi is that number 3 block, so the block that's wrapping around on the right-hand side of the page. And the Tosfot, number 4, they're often longer because they're these longer explanations are on the left-hand side of the page. And you see they also have these big, words that are thrown in there to show you where they're trying to tie into the text. Lastly, are the additional wraparounds. So you have, like you see here on the bottom, you have other commentaries, then you have these kind of like side glosses. And in general, there's 3 main things that are going on here. If it's a commentary that's wrapping around the bottom, it's probably a more modern commentary. More modern being a relative term. So it's a usually 13th or 14th century commentary on the Talmud, and those will be wrapped around the bottom. If it's on the sides, it's one of 2 things. It is either helping to elucidate for you where a biblical verse cited in the Mishnah or the Gemara is found, and like quoting that verse at length, or it's helping you understand where you would find what's going on right now in a book of law, in a book of halakha. Because again, immediately following the Talmud, they started trying to figure out how do we make this more concise? How do we put this into law books? And so if you're studying Gemara, if you're studying Talmud, you're like, oh, I recognize this. They're talking about the laws of like what you can carry on Shabbos. there will be a column on the side that'll say, if you want to just look for the laws of what you can and can't carry on Shabbos, here's where to find it in the Shulchan Aruch. Like, that's where you go to find that. So that's the page of Talmud.
It seems like took something big, made it small, made it big.
Yes, this is what I call the accordion law of Jewish text, which is we condense something because things are too big and unwieldy, and then people start writing commentaries on that thing, and people write more commentaries and more commentaries, saying, oh, this is where they found it, and this is where it comes from, and this is da-da-da, and then someone else comes along and says, this is too unwieldy, scrunches it down, makes it a new thing, but then immediately after they do that, people start writing commentaries on it, and it starts getting bigger and bigger. We'll see this a lot, especially when we get into Jewish law, with the Rambam, with the Tur, with the Shulchan Aruch, and with the Mishnah Berurah. So, that's our tour of the page. I'm going to stop screen sharing for a second. Any questions, comments, thoughts about what a page of Talmud looks like?
I originally was like, because, you know, there's the whole, like, the Daf Yomi or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like 1 page of Talmud a day. I was like,
Yes.
It's 1 page. How hard could it be? And now I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, no.
Oh,
Like,
and I should clarify, this, what you're seeing, this is not a page of Talmud.
No.
This
half
is
page.
this is an Amud, which is half a page. A full page is this and the other side of it. That a daf is not just this. This is an Amud, which is one half of a page. You actually have to learn both this and the other side of the page too. Each daf of Talmud has an A side and a B side. So this is Lamed Gimel, this is 33 Amud Aleph, this is the first side of it. There's a whole second side of it that's not even here that is involved in learning it. Yeah, super fun. Daf Yomi is great. I made it through 1 tractate and like 12 pages of the second one, and then I dropped out.
I think Rabbi Walk has taken on that challenge. He's trying to do it.
It's wonderful. I was doing really well, and then the pandemic hit, and like life went crazy, and I just couldn't stick with it. I do aspire to get back to it one day.
One day.
It's a lot of fun. It's learning Talmud is a lot of fun. It's also, as you might have seen, quite challenging.
maybe when
So
I'm
how
retired.
long did you spend per day working on?
So I used, here, I'll just show you because I think I have it with me. I used this, I didn't study right off. Most people who learn Daf Yomi don't study right off the daf. They use various study guides. So I used this, where each one of these, each 2 pages is 1/2 of a page is an Amud. And, sorry, I can't really show you on the screen, but it's
there?
Yeah. Can you see it? Sorry. So I'll just explain. I'll explain what I'm showing. It's done by a rabbi named Adin Steinsaltz, and what he did was he put in all the vowels and the punctuation. So it gives you that, and then also this version around the side has modern Hebrew translations for the Aramaic. So it's still a challenge for me because it's still not my native language. But if I'm really stuck on the Aramaic, I don't have to go look it up in the dictionary. He's going to tell me what the modern Hebrew is, so then I can progress through it more quickly. So studying with this, it would be 4 pages of this would be 1 page of Talmud, and it would take me an hour to an hour and 15 minutes a day usually. Depends on the length of the page.
Yeah.
But when I was living in New York and I was riding the subway every day, it was a great time. Would just sit on the subway, learn my daf. It was wonderful. Okay, we are now going to look at a couple of examples of sugya, a section or like a little bit of Talmud. It's called a sugya. It's an Aramaic word that means, I don't know, little section. And we're going to look at 2, and we're going to do this kind of quickly because then we're going to try to get to the other thing that I wanted to do. I have a fun activity planned, so be excited. Okay, so oh wait, I have to share my screen. The hybrid thing.
Rabbi,
Yes.
can you email us people in the Zoom land, the source sheets that you use so we can kind of have a copy, especially
Yes.
this one?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
Let me. I have this recorded, so I'll be able to see who is on. So I will send you an email with these source sheets. But yes, that's a good question. All right, here we go.
Zoomagog is the Cantor called it.
Yes, in the Zoomagog. All right, okay. So we are in Tractate Bava Kama. There's 3 Bavas. There's Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Batra, which means the first Bava, the middle Bava, and the last Bava. Not even joking. That's literally what those mean in Aramaic.
How about
What is Bava?
Baba Mainza?
Baba Maisa, yeah. All three of these tractates deal with property law. So these are a lot of very legal tractates in the Talmud, but they also, as you'll see, they have some stories in them. So we're going to look at one short sugya just to get an idea of how the Talmud is relating to the Mishnah, like the purpose of the Talmud. Then we're going to look at a second sugya that's not even going to really discuss the Mishnah, just we're going to look at the Gemara. We're going to look at the more Talmud-y part of it, just because to more focus on the content. So, do I have someone in the Zoomiverse who wants to read our Mishnah from Bava Kama on page 83b?
I can read.
Go for it.
One who injures another is liable to pay compensation for that injury due to 5 types of indemnity. He must pay for damage, for pain, for medical costs, for loss of livelihood, and for humiliation. Now, why are some not italicized, but bold, and some words not?
Great. So I was about to explain that. One of the things that you will often see... No, that's a great question. One of the things that you will often see in translations of Mishnah and in translations of Gemara is these are what the actual words are, and here's the elucidation that we add to make these words make sense. So the bolded words are the direct translations of the Hebrew. The non-bolded words are there to help it make sense. Because if you said one who injures another is liable due to 5 types, then you might not know what are they liable. These are just elucidating words, but they are additions. So it's what I love about Sefaria is it makes clear what is the direct translation and what is the elucidation. What is there to show you to help it make more sense, essentially. So we have this Mishnah. The Mishnah seems pretty straightforward. One who injures another is liable to pay money for that injury due to these 5 types of indemnity. So the Gemara I'm going to read because there's a lot of this, as you see, unbolded stuff, and I'm going to skip some of it because I want to actually emphasize like what is actually the Gemara saying here. So the Gemara's first word is amai. Why? So here it says, the Gemara asks, why does the Mishnah take for granted the blah, blah, blah. Literally in the Aramaic, it's just, what? Like, the Gemara is literally coming and saying, like, wait a second, what are you talking about, Mishnah? Like, that doesn't make any sense at all, because Ein tachat ein amar Rachmana. The merciful one states in the Torah very clearly in Exodus, an eye for an eye. Mishnah, where are you getting this idea about you pay monetary compensation for an injury? It clearly seems to say you're supposed to poke someone's eye out. and so the reason I brought this sugya is because it's a great example of the Gemara, the Talmud, looking at the Mishnah and saying, huh? And then trying to figure it out. Because we should remember the Gemara is coming generations after the Mishnah. The rabbis who are quoted in the Mishnah, Corey's here. The rabbis who are quoted in the Mishnah have been dead for 250 years. And these rabbis, they've been passing down this oral tradition one to the other, and they have these traditions, but sometimes it's a game of telephone, and sometimes it's confusing, and sometimes they don't totally understand what's going on. And they have these conversations about it for the sake of the learning. That we can look at the Talmud as a teaching tool. That we can look at this voice of the Talmud saying, wait, Mishnah, what? As a pedagogical tool. It's like if a teacher got up in front of class, if I was here and I said, here's this statement. What are we talking about here? That it's an opening that allows for discussion. It's a tool that allows for discussion. And because at its outset, the Talmud was also passed down orally, these are also devices. These are devices to remember the Mishnah says this. What? Here's the answer. So these are all ways that the Gemara was passed down so that it would be remembered and it would be combined. So they say, you might have thought, Salka da'atach, Ema, ein mamash. You might have said, actually an eye. That if someone pokes her out, you should actually poke an eye. La salka da'atach. Don't let that arise in your head. That is not correct. As it is taught in a Braita, which remember we learned last time about what Braitas are. Those are the Mishnaic statements that are not in the Mishnah. They're the ones that are in the Tosefta. And you're all very good students, so you already knew that. because we have this statement in the Breita that says one might have thought that if one blinded the eye of another, then the court blinds his eye. Or if one severed the hand of another, the court severs his hand, etc. Therefore, the verse states one who strikes a person, and it also says one who strikes an animal, so that we know just as one who strikes an animal is liable to pay monetarily, so too one who strikes a human. So basically the Gemara is trying to figure out how do we rationalize, because the Mishnah doesn't explain itself. In the accordion, the Mishnah is the tight accordion, the Gemara has to expand it. The Gemara says the Mishnah doesn't explain itself. We need to find the explanations, the rationalization for the Mishnah statements, because we know they're right, because they can't be wrong. In the Gemara, if you quote a Mishnaic rabbi, they're right. You can't. An Amora cannot contradict a Tana. That the Tanaim are always right if there's an argument between what a Tana said and what an Amora said. And when they're arguing with each other in the Gemara, the way to pull a trump card is, but I have a quote from a Tana. I have a quote from an older source that's in Hebrew, that's from the Mishnah, that's from the Tosefta, that's a Breita. So therefore, I'm right and you're wrong because you're just talking out your tush.
It's like the mom.
Exactly. So
Mom said this.
exactly. So the Mishnah's, so the Gemara's project of explaining the Mishnah, as you can see here, is they know that they have to get to that the Mishnah is right. The question is, how are we going to get there? So they do it here by using a trick, by taking two verses that use similar language, which is actually a trick that they learned from Midrash. It's one of our Midrashic ways of figuring things out, that they take two, which again, you all remember that Midrash is that first layer of exegesis on the text. Good job. Way to go, everyone. And so you have this trick in Midrash where if we have two verses that use similar language, then we can find them to use similar outcomes. So if we use the same language to talk about the way that one hits a human and the way that one hits an animal, then we can learn that one hits a human just as you are liable for monetary compensation if you hit an animal, so too when you hit a human, same deal. Now, you might have asked, why didn't they do it the other way around? Why didn't they say, well, if I was liable to get my hand chopped off for chopping off a person's hand, why should I get my, foot chopped off for chopping off a horse's hoof?
Or why should I chop off my horse's foot?
Or why shouldn't I chop off my horse's foot if I chop off their horse's foot? Mm-hmm. Great question, but that's not where they went with it because they had to arrive at where the Mishnah arrived. That the point of this is to arrive at where the Mishnah arrives because the Mishnah is always right. And so the Gemara is here, and sorry, you can see the bottom of the English here on this page. So that's how the Gemara gets there. Yes, Lewis.
So if all this mumbo jumbo and arguing back and forth, who is the ultimate judge of who's right or wrong in all this?
Great. So Lewis asks a wonderful question. There's all this arguing back and forth in the Talmud. Who's right? Who do we listen to? And the answer is it depends on the argument. Sometimes, there are pairs of rabbis who would often argue with each other. So Hillel and Shammai, Rav and Shmuel, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. And in most of these cases, sometimes one would win the argument and sometimes the other would win the argument. Now, Hillel had an almost perfect record. Shammai did very poorly. But other than the two of them, usually when you'd get these pairs of rabbis, they'd argue over a point. And then at the end, it would say, okay, the halacha is like this rabbi. Or sometimes it says teko, which means it's a tie. And we actually don't know. And then it's left to later generations to figure it out. And so then later law books will try to figure out what's the actual right way of doing things.
Don't they sometimes have a majority opinion and minority?
Right. Sometimes it will say the Chachamim say, which is kind of the generalized majority, and then there will be a singular outlier. So it'll say the Chachamim say, and then we're going to see that in our very next text. It'll say the Chachamim say this, everyone says this, but Rabbi Yehuda said why. And, Rabbi Yehuda kind of does his own thing. There are certain categories of law for which we usually turn to one person. So around Shabbos, we usually turn to Shmuel. What Shmuel says usually goes. Kashrut, if it's about the slaughtering of animals, I think it's Rabbi Yehuda. I don't remember. Don't quote me on that. Not that you're going to probably be learning too much of Masechet Chulin. But if Rabbi Yehuda is in an argument with people, usually we go by Rabbi Yehuda. But those aren't hard and fast rules. The way that we really know Lewis is we read the later commentaries on the Talmud, and they tell us who won because they tell us how we do things now. That some of it is by... Go ahead.
How do they establish a precedent?
Right, exactly. A precedent gets established, and then whoever's rule that was that established that precedent, that's who we use now. Great. Okay. Moving on. So we're going from Bava Kama, the first Bava, into Bava Metzia, the middle Bava. So good job, everyone. You graduated Bava Kama. You're into Bava Metzia. All right. So we are talking about. So we learned in a Mishnah, in a separate Mishnah, a Mishnah that was called Kalim, and I'm gonna talk us through this one because there's a lot of ins and outs, and we're just gonna go with it. So we learned in this Mishnah Kalim that there's this type of earthenware oven that if you cut it into segments and you place sand between each and every segment, that Rabbi Eliezer deems it ritually pure. Sorry, I forgot to scroll. There you go. Okay. So essentially what we're talking about here is some sort of oven that, because in those days, your oven would have been like on the ground and it would have been made out of clay. Like imagine like a pizza oven in your backyard. That's what we're thinking of here, an oven. So that type of oven, except there's like a layer of clay and then a layer of sand and then a layer of clay and then a layer of sand and then a layer of clay and then a layer of sand. The rabbis are arguing whether or not this is a singular entity or whether it's actually because it's broken, then the question is, can you purify it? Most of the rabbis are saying no because it's not a singular entity. Rabbi Eliezer is saying it's fine. Rabbi Eliezer ben Harkinos is like, no, I know, don't worry, guys, you can make this pure. It's okay. That's the setup to this story. So Rabbi Eliezer deems it ritually pure. The rabbis deem it ritually impure. An important note: the Rabbi Eliezer that we're talking about here is Rabbi Eliezer ben Hirkanus. He is referred to in the Mishnah as a cistern who does not lose a single drop. His strength is that he can learn. He learns everything and he retains it and he can spit it back out. He's not known for creative thinking. He's known for being able to bring everything in and then regurgitate information in an incredible way. He has an incredible mind for it. But that means that he's very, very, very sure of himself when he says something, because it's definitely something he heard from someone and it's definitely something he knows. And so that's just an important thing to know about Rabbi Eliezer here. Okay. So this is known as the Oven of Achnai. That's the name that they gave this oven.
That's with the walls.
The one with the sand and everything, yeah.
I mean, the argument they had the walls caving in.
We're going to get there. We're going to get there, yeah. So this is, I'm giving you the backstory into that story.
Okay.
So here, so this is known as the Oven of Achnai. Why is it called the Oven of Achnai? They say it's Achnai because it's like a snake, because it had these coils of sand around it. But then they also say it's Achnai because, here, and Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said they called it the Achnai because the rabbis surrounded it with their statements like a snake. So there's a literalist interpretation and a more figurative interpretation. So, on that day, when they discussed the matter, Rabbi Eliezer answered all possible answers in the world to support his opinion. The rabbis were saying, this is why it's impure, and Rabbi Eliezer had an answer. They said, this is why it's impure. Rabbi Eliezer has an answer. He had an answer for everything. The other important thing to know about Rabbi Eliezer, and generally this period of Gemara, is this is the very beginning of what's known as Merkava mysticism, which is mysticism that deals with God's holy chariot and envisioning God's chariot. And there was belief that by being in touch with what God's chariot looked like, you could work certain supernatural things in the world. So Eliezer ben Hirkanus was part of this milieu in which there was the first inklings of a Jewish mystical tradition, and that Jewish mystical tradition dealt with some funky supernatural stuff. So, and Eliezer was very powerful in this. He was big time Merkava dude. So Rabbi Eliezer answered all their positions, but the rabbis did not accept his explanations. Rabbi Eliezer would say X, and the rabbis would say no. He'd say Y, the rabbis would say no. Nothing was working. So, after failing to convince them logically, Rabbi Eliezer says, if the halacha, if the Jewish law, if the answer, as Lewis would say, if the answer is in my opinion, this carob tree will prove it. And the Gemara relates the carob tree was uprooted from its place 100 cubits, and some say 400 cubits. I love the things that the Gemara manages to keep in there. Like, it was 100 cubits, but some people say 400.
Cubits about 1.5 feet.
Yeah, give or take. The rabbis then said to him, one does not cite halachic proof from a carob tree. That's not how we do things here. That'd be like, you know, if we're having an argument and then you're like, oh yeah, well, if I'm right, the stoplight will turn green right now. And it does. You're like, that doesn't prove anything. It just happened to happen at that time.
Well, you know the light's going to turn green. You don't know the carob tree's going to move.
Maybe you do, maybe you don't. All right, so then Rabbi Eliezer said, see, the carob tree wasn't enough. Here's how I'm going to prove it. If the halacha is with me, the stream will turn backwards. And lo and behold, the stream turned backwards. It turned the other way and it started flowing the other way. And the rabbis answered to him, one does not cite halachic proof from a stream. Very nice. You did a magic trick. That doesn't make you right here. Then Rabbi Eliezer raises the stakes. Rabbi Eliezer says, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, the walls of the study hall will prove it. And the walls of the study hall leaned inward and began to fall. They're all in, this is like a Samson moment, where they're all about to be crushed by the walls of the study. This isn't funny. This is life and death here. The rabbis are like in it.
Yeah, okay.
Rabbi Yehoshua scolded the walls. Rabbi Yehoshua said, not so fast. Walls, if Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of halakha, what is the nature of your involvement with this dispute? Basically, he said, butt out of it, walls. What's it to you? Like, why are you threatening us here over this matter of Torah? And the walls, I love this part too. The walls did not fall because of deference to Rabbi Yehoshua, but they also did not straighten out of deference to Rabbi Eliezer, and they still remain leaning. So one can imagine there probably was a yeshiva somewhere that had leaning walls, and this was part of the origin story of how those walls were leaning, of how they were never quite collapsed, but they kind of a leaning Tower of Pisa situation in a yeshiva somewhere in northern Israel. So Rabbi Eliezer is still
Is this
not
in northern
determined.
Israel or in Babylonia?
This is in northern Israel. It is a Talmudic story about the Tannaitic period. So
okay.
they're telling a story about the rabbis, about
Okay.
the Mishnaic rabbis. Rabbi Eliezer is a Mishnaic rabbi, as is Rabbi Yehoshua. All right, so Rabbi Eliezer said, if the halacha is accordance with my opinion, heaven will prove it. And a divine voice of Bat Kol emerged from heaven and said, why are you differing with Rabbi Eliezer? As the halacha is in accordance with his opinion in every place he expresses his opinion. Rabbi Eliezer, again, he's a cistern. He knows everything. He takes in all of the knowledge and he's just spitting it back out. How could you disagree with him? Okay, enjoy Louisville basketball, Rose. Thank you for being here. So Rabbi Eliezer, this heavenly voice is saying, Rabbi Eliezer is right. What are you all doing? And then Rabbi Yehoshua, who you remember, he's the same rabbi who stopped the walls from falling. Rabbi Yehoshua stood on his feet and said, Lo bashamayim hi. It is not in heaven. Now, it should be noted, Rabbi Yehoshua basically is saying, and here, we'll read this here. What is the relevance of this phrase? It is not in heaven in this context. Rabbi Yirmiyah, so here now this is a later sage, this is a Talmudic, a Gemara era sage, says, since the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai, we do not regard a divine voice. As you already wrote at Mount Sinai, in the Torah, after the majority you should incline. That there's a verse in the Torah that says majority rules. And so therefore, once the Torah was given to Moshe, like basically what the rabbis are saying was like, it was like 50-1, now it's 50-2. Like, okay, so your second person is a bat kol, is a divine voice. It doesn't make a difference here. Now, it should be noted, in the grand tradition of the Talmud, this verse is taken wildly out of context. Lo b'shamayim hi, it is not in heaven, is meant to tell people that Torah is accessible to them, that it's not up in heaven, that you should have to go reach for it, or that it's over the sea, that it's too far away. It doesn't mean God's voice doesn't count. But Rabbi Yehoshua takes that verse and makes it mean that here. And Rabbi Yirmiyah says that's what it means in this case. Then, later on, we have this story that says Rabbi Natan encountered Elijah the prophet and said to him, what did the Holy One, blessed be God, do at that time when Rabbi Yehoshua said, Lo b'shamayim hi? And Elijah said, the Holy One smiled and said, but nitzchuni banai, my children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me. Now, many people stop teaching the story there because the point of this story for a lot of people, and one of the things that I take away from it is, yes, great. The Torah was given to Moses at Sinai, God's divine Torah, but now it's in our hands. Lo b'shamayim hi, it's not in heaven, it's with us to interpret, and therefore we need to do that work of interpreting it. That if we don't do this interpretive work, then we're losing the whole project. That that's what the Gemara is all about, is it's saying, this is for us to do, and that we can disagree, but that majority is going to rule. And even if majority rules in a way that God maybe wouldn't be so happy with, too bad. Majority rules. Nitzchuni banai, nitzchuni banai. There's a second part of this story, though, and I only included part of it because there's other things that I want to get to, and we only have 15 minutes left, so yikes. Right, so on that day, they brought all of the ritually pure items that were deemed pure by the ruling of Rabbi Eliezer and burned them in a fire. And the sages reached a consensus in this regard, and they ostracized him. They essentially excommunicated him.
That's pretty severe.
It is. So there's two things I want to emphasize here. One is how important the rabbis took this. How this was not a laughing matter to them. This was serious. This was, how are we going to make sense of our lives as Jews in the post-temple period when there's no more central authority, when there's no more priesthood that can do anything? How are we going to continue as Jews? What does this look like? And this was really serious. And if one person was unwilling to go with the majority, if they were willing to crash down the walls of the yeshiva to prove their point, that was really problematic. Now, one could definitely say the rabbis then went to the other extreme of excommunicating Rabbi Eliezer. And they say that Rabbi Akiva said that he should go, lest an unseemly person go, and he would thereby destroy the entire world. That they were actually afraid of Rabbi Eliezer's anger and his pain and his sadness of knowing that he was excommunicated. And it says later on in the Gemara, it goes on to say that on the day that he found out that he was excommunicated, a third of the world's olives crops died, a third of the world's wheat went bad, and any woman who was kneading dough at that moment, it spoiled in her hands. That his pain and his grief of his ostracization was so deep that it was able to have that impact on the world.
The previous thing we read from Bava, was it Batra? Kama. Wouldn't these rabbis owe him compensation?
Well, they didn't physically hurt him.
Yeah, but it says humiliation was one of the.
Yes. So right. So it's a fair question. It's a fair point. But the point was that this was taken really seriously, and that while yes, this is a triumph of the majority, it's also a cautionary tale of when the majority gets too drunk on its power, and the way that a majority can hurt someone who they disagree with. So I wanted to bring that story. We only have about 10 minutes now for this last activity, but we're gonna give it a shot, and we're gonna do it in two groups. I wanted to do it in more, but I just don't think we're gonna have time. So one second, you can grab these. Okay, so here is what's gonna happen. For those of you who are, sorry, Charlie asked a question. Are these supposed to be taken metaphorically? Charlie, can you unmute and say a little bit more about your question?
I mean, just the details about all the crops dying and about the walls caving in and God speaking down.
Yeah, I can't think of that. So I'll explain. So what Charlie asked is, are all of these seemingly fantastical details meant to be taken literally or metaphorically? And some of that depends on who you ask. I would say yes. I would say they're meant to be taken metaphorically, that this is a fable in a sense, a tale that is told in order to teach. There are other folks who you could talk to who would say, no, this is literally what happened. A carob tree uprooted itself and moved over there because God was present in the discussions of these sages. So that's not how I choose to view Talmud, but I don't, judge anyone who does view Talmud in a more literal way. But yes, I would say for my point of view, this is meant to be taken metaphorically or as parable or fable.
It's true even if it's not fact.
Exactly. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to split the people here into chavruta, and I'm going to get you started, and then I'm going to work with y'all. Do pens? Do y'all have pens?
I do.
I have one, but it doesn't work.
At least one per pair?
I have
Great.
several
Okay, great.
members.
So here, you two are going to be a pair, and you two are going to be a pair. We're going to be working on our own little daf of Talmud. So, and I'm going to share one with y'all in just 1 second. I just have to get the link. Sorry, 1 second. All right. So for those of you who are on Zoom,
Do you want a pen?
I am
No,
going
we
to
just
put
need
in the
one for
chat.
Okay.
Well, you need one, but for you two and one for you two.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, great.
you
Yeah,
keep
but-
the
Okay.
pen.
So
because
if you open up this Google Doc,
my scribbles-
and I'm gonna also share the screen with it, but hopefully you will see. Oh wait,
I can't read my own writing, even though I'm printing.
sorry, 1 sec.
Okay, yeah,
Let me get it open here. Are y'all able to open that up? Okay, great. Is it two? Does it say 2A on the top? Did I send you that one?
It says 3B.
Oh, 3B. Okay, 1 second. Then let me get to 3B. Okay, there we go. Okay, great. So
3B for me too.
okay, so here's what I'm gonna say. I'm gonna assign you. So sorry, in the Zoom, Beth, you are gonna write the Gemara. Estella, you're gonna be our Rashi, and Shelby, you're gonna be our Tosfot, and Cindy, you're gonna be our later rabbinic commentary.
Okay.
Charlie, you are going to work. I'm gonna put you in a breakout room. Sorry, here, 1 second. Let me give instructions for people in here so they can get started, and then I'll figure out how this is gonna work here. Y'all should just write the Gemara to the Mishnah together as a chavruta. So read the Mishnah and then write a Gemara. There's prompts there to tell you how to do it. So, and you, if you want to move a little farther away so that you can talk. Okay. I am going to put Charlie. I'm going to put you in a breakout room with Beth, and you two are going to write the Gemara together. Okay. I think that's everyone. So 1 second. I'm going to stop sharing for just 1 sec to do this breakout room.
Condition called peripheral mobility. My hands and feet. It means you can barely hold a pen, but I'm right with it. Worse, this hand's worse than the left hand. This was not.
Okay, so Beth and Charlie, you're going to go into a breakout room to write the Gemara, and then the rest of you are writing what I told you. Sorry for the confusion. I was expecting a few more people, and then it would have been like this whole rotation-y thing, but it's fine. So Beth and Charlie, can y'all go into that breakout room?
So which?
Great.
We're supposed to
Okay, so
commenting.
yeah. So the folks who are here,
Some part.
you should wait a little bit to see what their commentary is on the Gemara. But you can all to see what their commentary is on the Mishnah. But you can also start your own commentary on the Mishnah in your little area in that Google sheet. Okay.
So it is not your duty to finish the work, but neither.
Okay. So I'm gonna pop into their breakout room really quickly. Okay.
You have studied much Torah. Initial.
Okay, this is what
Yeah,
said.
Yeah.
Labor.
Hands-on Torah.
Hey, guys.
Sacrifices for
Put the grant of the Lord into.
Hey guys, was it clear what you're supposed to do?
No.
No. Okay.
Sort of. I'm more.
Alright. So.
So here, wait, you're on 3.
So, another
So-
way that look at the
I know.
Commenting on
is the
Okay.
reward of the
clarifying, asking
righteous
questions about the
and
Mishnah,
engaged
telling
town
us
life.
what they say.
Right. Isn't it
in the
now?
present.
Yeah, well, that one's, yeah. So, and what is the work that you're supposed to,
Right, now you didn't finish the work, but yeah,
Well,
what
what
work
pops
is
into
that?
my mind right
Yeah.
off
and,
is by the time you get to the
I mean, I
Gemara,
sort of know what it's
the temple is
referring to.
long
but
gone.
that's just-
Right. So
So,
what's a substitute?
Well, that's
Yes,
probably-
uh-huh.
This was before they really.
I
right.
would think this is something they
Sort of a really,
would address.
well-known
because
section.
What do we do?
Right.
One leg is gone, it falls over.
Right.
Now, and-
Two-legged stools don't do
okay,
too well.
so,
So that would be my guess is the first thing they talk
So-
about here.
so,
Yeah,
So
since
we're
we
asking
don't have the
questions.
temple.
What
So
is
this
the
isn't your guess of what
work?
they talk about. This is you guys writing what you think.
Right.
I think.
Okay.
if you have
okay, so,
one-
I think I still want to talk
we're
about
supposed
that.
to
What do we
be-
do?
Right. So there's some
Same.
examples.
Stool's
of, like,
missing
what
a
some of the
leg.
questions are.
Right.
yeah, what is the word you want us to be given?
But you have your own question, but you're identifying one thing to comment on in the Mishnah
Not
and
two,
commenting on it.
not two or
Oh,
four.
so we just picked
Well,
one
two
thing.
would
Right.
fall
Like
over.
Rabbi Lee would say
Four,
this, but
It may not
Rabbi
be,
Marta would say
it may
that.
not be coplanar and it'll
Uh,
one.
So,
Three,
we-
always
I mean,
coplanar.
not
I'm
sure
thinking
about-
like
I
an,
can
talk like an
write. But I
engineer, I
mean,
know.
Yeah.
That's what I
That's
am.
This one, what is the word?
I think the
Or
more
the
moving
last
parts you
one?
have, the more you have
Line
to
out,
go
give
wrong.
you line out,
Yeah.
answer now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what is
So
the
yeah,
reward?
like
Right.
And that was
what's the
something
role
that we
of-
sort of set
what is
down
the
here.
reward?
sacrifices.
So,
Which one am
I don't know. I really don't. My mind is just not here. And,
It's-
I mean,
I
and
wanna
again,
get
it's
something we
something
can
I
actively
sort of
do.
know, so I sort of have
Right.
ideas on
Sacrifices.
this for the reward.
So I'm gonna do this in like memo style because
Well,
I'm
yeah,
so used
so
to
what-
writing.
what would the
Okay, that's
reward
fine.
be?
Okay.
Would that be,
So what
would
would
that be
you
something
do?
I have
tangible,
to wait
or
for-
would it be
Hmm.
like?
What would your substitution
Tomorrow.
be?
Oh, I actually know the answer, which
Claim.
makes it
Well, I know,
harder.
yeah.
We all know the
Right.
answer.
Like, you know,
Um,
volunteer of the year type of thing, you know, a sort of.
We'd have to
your-
come
your
up with a
written
new
history
ritual, of
for-
course.
For being,
This is a ritual we're talking about,
doing the work.
as opposed to
Whatever
Torah,
the
which
work
is just set
is.
there, and doing good deeds isn't a ritual, just doing what
Right.
you should do.
So,
So we need a new
and
ritual.
if it's in the world, yeah, so. I don't know.
One thing is maybe you could, you know, say read all the things you would have would sacrifice for the temple there.
Yeah, you can, totally.
Come on, I think we should just do the
Okay,
question.
we'll just do the
We're not
question.
accomplished enough to know the answer.
Does it read?
It is
recite
too
the
late
the
and I
list of
haven't had
sacrifices you
dinner.
would be making had we had a temple.
Right, so,
It is
So-
a substitute for
What?
actually making the sacrifices, we can't do that.
And why is studying Torah the reward and not, because it says if you have studied much Torah, you shall be given much reward.
isn't the study of Torah itself the reward,
Yeah,
right?
or is the study of Torah the work?
Yeah.
What else do you think we can do?
It's hard because.
Okay.
So
it's
you
just
study
like
the
those
Torah,
things
so
where it's like,
so wait,
ah,
yeah,
we know
so
what's
study
put
the
in.
Torah,
We know what the answer
the
is.
work
Sort
or
of.
the reward?
Yeah.
Sort of what the answer is.
We're not in the situation they were that had to come up with something on their
Right.
own.
Exactly.
We don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-mm.
And then it talks about
Would-
getting paid.
Those are required to pay you.
Wait until tomorrow is written a little bit more.
So I guess that's sort of saying that you should be rewarded for whatever work you've done.
This is gonna sound so silly, but I would
Right.
price
So
match.
yeah. So if you do work, you should be
So
rewarded,
if
right?
like
That's
the
sort of what
cost
that's.
Hey, y'all.
that's saying.
the money that would go into the
How you
Donate the
doing?
Money that
Right,
the animals would have
exactly.
cost, okay.
into like furthering like Torah study,
Beth, I'm not
Take
hearing
one.
you for some
the
reason.
whole idea, or the practice of good deeds, right?
Actually,
Oh,
monetary.
you know, the good deeds is the third leg.
In this case.
Right, yeah, but
Donate
I'm
the
saying like,
money.
I'm
Sorry.
saying- I'm
I
saying
think
with the,
it's
instead of
using
doing,
that almost as a
instead of doing the
metaphor.
temple sacrifices,
So
you
if
put
you,
more money
like,
into
if I
doing
work,
what
I
the
get
temple
paid, so
sacrifices
therefore
would
if
cost
you
into
do
doing these
the-
two things.
whatever work
But
to
you
help
need
you,
the
like,
third-
then you
third
should
leg.
get paid.
Well, I don't care how
So
big
there
the
should be
legs are,
some
if you only
reward
have
for
two, it's
doing
gonna
the
fall
work.
over.
Even if
I'm
you
an
don't finish.
engineer, doing.
Yeah.
You're
Okay.
entitled.
But it has to be something ritualistic. So maybe every day you should read the portions of the Torah that talk about what sacrifices to
But-
make.
Well, but isn't that just the same as beefing up the Torah? Then?
Yeah, well, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, so you're not gonna get it
We're
now.
using the Torah for.
You're gonna get rewarded, but you're not gonna get it now. That's what I get out of it.
Okay. I'm gonna bring everyone back together. We needed more time for this. I apologize.
Yes, we did.
We can't,
Bonus class.
we can't
They
open
just
home
did
in
this
10
in
minutes.
If I
I know,
had to
I know,
vote-
I know.
Yeah, I know.
All
I
right.
realize we're very aware.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that shouldn't have been unmuted. Oh, that was why. It's all coming together now. 1 second. They're going to be coming back in from the breakout room momentarily. Can I just close it? It takes 35 seconds. Why does it take so long? All right. So I apologize. We did not have enough time for this. I thought I could get through things more quickly than I could. So mea culpa. The idea here was going to be like there were going to be lots of people in Chavruta, and then you'd pass your sheet onto the next sheet, and they would comment on what you had said. It was this whole grand. Maybe we'll do a whole class just to do that, because I think it would be really fun. Hey, Beth and Charlie, I'm sorry. I know this was a lot and it was too fast, and I hope that y'all at least got to like schmooze a little bit and like had an okay time.
It was interesting, but my gosh, we didn't get very far.
That's totally fine. I recognize that there was not enough time for this activity. Maybe it will come back in a future week when we don't have too much else to do. We can come back to this because I do think it would be really fun if we had the time to actually do it. But I apologize that it just was too rushed.
Or just a bonus class after our CU.
Or it could be a bonus class. Maybe our CU will be writing our own Gemara. We shall see.
Schnapps.
Yeah, sure.
Perhaps. That would help the writing now.
All right. So I just want to wrap up and say I hope that I know this was a bit of a whirlwind tour of the Talmud, but I hope that some of the main points got across, that like what the Talmud is, what the Gemara is, what its project is, what it was trying to do, and then lastly that idea that I think is so core to the Talmud, which is this idea that the Torah is ours and is for ours to discuss and ours to figure out. That idea of lo b'shamayim hi is really, that is the explanation of why we have a Talmud, is because it's on us to figure it out. It's on us to do all of this work, and that we are here to make Judaism livable in our day. So yes.
So as you're saying that, how does it get reconciled, that thought, with that you said before? You can never disagree with the Tanaim.
Yeah.
That's what they said. That's it. So if later, how do you ever reinterpret things once they've said something?
Great. So the question is, how do you reconcile this idea of lo b'shamayim hi with the other thing of the older generation is always right? And I would say that this is actually one of the major sticky points between Orthodox and conservative Judaism, is that both movements hold by halakha, hold by Jewish law, and hold by precedent. But the conservative movement is more willing to say, we know things now that they didn't know then, so we can reinterpret in a more free manner. Whereas the Orthodox movement is more beholden to the precedents that have been set by earlier generations. So it's actually one of the main points of contention between the two movements, is how much do we rely on our own current modern knowledge, or even knowledge that came a few hundred years, after when they came, and are we able to, what will happen in conservative legal jurisprudence will be, oh, there was a minority opinion in the Talmud that wasn't the one that won out, but it was accepted as okay back then, so therefore can we re-accept it as okay now? What's called paskening from the Talmud, or creating Jewish law from the Talmud, which is very frowned upon in Orthodox circles because you have to follow the trajectory of the law, and we'll talk more about that next week. But yeah, so it's a good question. It's a question that is answered differently depending on who you ask. Yes, Stella.
Just to let you know that I never went into a break room.
I know.
I didn't have a partner.
I know you were not sent out into a break room. I tried to just assign you something. It was all very last minute, and the hybrid thing made it more difficult. I apologize. We'll do better next time. It was not well done. It was that was my bad. I thought I could figure it out, and it didn't quite come together. Any other last questions or comments on the Talmud? Alrighty, I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your week. Jews and Brews at 11 on Wednesday.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I don't know how I lost that. I don't know. I had it at one point.